We have been talking of equality during the last so many sessions that we hardly have time to practice it. And today's, I assure you, is the last session when we are going to talk further about equality. It is the chapter on action of equality. We have seen during our previous discussion that equality is both passive and active according to the need of the situation. The particular type of equality begins to function. And our first experience in the practice of equality is a certain indifference, a certain quiescence when there are contacts and impacts from outside. We just maintain an attitude of quiet, not reacting. But that is only the first step. That is not enough. That is not enough to give us an entry into the first grounds of the divine life. For that, we need to practice the next step, which is to rise above, to become superior to nature. That is, we do not only we front things with a certain attitude of indifference, of quiescence, but we rise above the situation of reactions, and from there decide which way we are to react. We decide not on the question whether a contact is pleasant or unpleasant, welcome or unwelcome, but what is the right thing to do, and that you can do only when you are detached and when you rise superior to the situation. And this ability, capacity to rise superior to the situation is the first secret of the soul's mastery. When I was fresh here, my teacher always used to say, it is not enough to be equal to a situation. You have to rise above it. I could not fully understand the implications of that statement, and it is only when I read Sri Aurobindo's explanation of why superiority to a situation is indispensable for the soul's mastery over nature, soul's mastery over existence. Most of us, as mental beings, use our mind, the mental will, as an instrument for deciding how we are to react, in what manner equality is to be practiced. But even after the mind knows and we know what is the reaction to be given, where exactly we have to confront this contact with the spirit of equality, still, after a time, as you begin to deal with the situation, the mind is overborne by desire. A desire that is projected by the life or the prana. Once the mind gets mixed up in the vibrations of desire, it loses its objectivity. It loses its capacity to react with equality. It tends to take sides. Naturally, we start explaining to ourselves why we should do this and not that. And it is only a purified mind, a purified intelligence that can know that already a bias has entered in our mind. The bias created by the inrush of desire. The mind has to be trained in a spiritual discipline. Our vision must undergo a revision and must learn to see the one Godhead, the one divine spread all in the universe. It is only when we not only recognize but accept the presence of a universal will, universal divinity, that we can hope to exercise what Sri Aurobindo calls a free acceptance of things. Otherwise, we always tend to decide each issue, referring it to our personal self-interest. Maybe ego, maybe desire, maybe preference, maybe prejudice. Whatever it is, there is a reservation, and that governs our choice. But if we practically accept, not only theoretically, the presence of a universal will, and that the divine is as much in me as in him, in situations that look favorable as also in situations that are unfavorable. When we are convinced of it, and by inner discipline ready to face the fact, then our being accepts freely any situation that is offered to it, reacts in the spirit of free acceptance to whatever is posed before it. To come to this level of equality, Sri Aurobindo says that 4 conditions are to be fulfilled. We have to progressively cultivate and naturalize 4 qualities, 4 states of spiritual being. First is equality, a practical equality called samatha in the Gita. Pleasant or unpleasant, good or bad, cold or hot, whatever the opposites, there must be an initial attitude that whatever comes, I am to accept. I accept what is given to me. Whether you explain it as coming from the will of God, or saying it comes from my destiny, or that it is a process of things in which we are placed, whatever the standpoint, and a readiness to accept what comes without complaint, without overjoy, but with a placid equality. That is samatha, the first step. The second condition is we must cultivate and acquire a poise in peace that refuses to be disturbed by any circumstance. Naturally, this is not acquired in a day. But we must find a small corner in our being, maybe in the heart, maybe at the back of the mind, where you can sense a breath of peace and get a foothold in that corner. Every one of us can experience at some time or other some nook, some corner in the being where peace is natural. So there we must stick. There we must obtain a foothold, and by rigorous, strenuous, regular discipline, extend that area of peace. Naturally, you first begin in a mental way. There is first the experience. Thereafter, you mentally visualize that peace is there. Even when you don't feel it, mentally recall that experience. Have that mental faith that there is the peace, and I have only to dig at it and I can touch it. So each time, each day, one has to devote a certain time to the visualization and the invocation of this peace and naturalize it. Once we do it and experiment with ourselves of calling that peace, of remembering that peace, and getting back into that peace when difficult situations present themselves to us, that is a capital gain. Mother said that each one's way of obtaining peace is different. But speaking as she was to children at that time, she said, even if you repeat the word peace or shanti slowly to yourselves, it comes. It unveils itself. It is not for nothing that the ancients prescribed a number of peace chants which are prefixed to the Upanishads, and each peace chant was to inaugurate the day's session. When they say Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, who can escape that descent of peace? Words are not letters. These are words which have been endowed with power by countless seers and practitioners during thousands of years. And only to repeat those words, it opens a button somewhere, it touches a button somewhere and opens the channel, linking us to the peace. So each language has a word for peace. Mother spoke of pay, is it pay or pay? P-A-I-X, pay in French, peace in English. And she illustrated that these are some of the available techniques to link ourselves with the peace that always exists. It is not that peace is brought on earth by our invocations. Actually, peace is always there, backing up all the movement that goes on its bosom. What we do is to open a window in our own being, giving us an entrance into that domain of peace. Each one of us carries around us an area of peace. We are not conscious. That is all. We are so much extrovert, occupied with day-to-day things, occupied with what we think to be important things, that we forget what treasure we carry within ourselves, above ourselves, behind ourselves. And the purpose of sadhana in a protected environment like this is precisely to awaken us to the potencies that are lying untapped within ourselves, that are there waiting to be tapped in the environment, in the atmosphere. Meditation, relaxation, these are intended to focus our consciousness towards peace. Whether we concentrate upon form or sound or upon an idea or a thought, these are all secondary. All these are intended to silence the mind, to bring the mind together, silence it for a while, at least in a part of it, so that you can get the peace. Another important point is that you cannot seize peace, you cannot hold peace, whether it is silence or peace. You have to let that peace or silence take possession of you. It's larger and vaster than ourselves. We have only to let ourselves taken possession by the surrounding or enveloping silence or peace. Now this peace, this quantum of peace which we succeed in making real to us in yoga, that should be always present. After samatha, there should be this shanti, this peace which is imperturbable in any circumstance. At least in some part of you, it must be there established. The third condition is there must be an inner felicity. Not that bubbling joy or excitement, but a continuous strain of happiness, what they call in Sanskrit antas-sukham, an inner felicity. Whatever happens, whatever the circumstances, whatever the conditions, that spiritual happiness, which does not depend upon outer reasons, outer circumstances and outer contacts, but is there on its own, that must be cultivated, that must be established. And the easiest way to make it natural is to open to the psychic being in us which radiates spontaneously this cheer, this quiet joy. You can almost feel it soft. You can almost touch it. When the psychic joy, when the psychic happiness exudes, you need nothing else. You don't seek for joy, you don't seek for liberation. Nothing disturbs. The whole previous perspective seems to be wrong. You do not care what happens either to yourselves or to others. It is a natural radiation of the felicity of the psychic part in us. So in the measure in which we awake to the presence of the psychic, make it real to us, evoke it, we participate in the movement, natural movement of inner felicity. This is the third. The fourth condition is we must not only have the inner happiness, but as a result of its establishment and continuous action in us, a participation in the universal life, the life of the world, in joy and laughter. That is, you participate in the ananda of manifestation. Of course, it can come only after the previous three conditions are fulfilled, but it is a must. It will not do to shut oneself in an inner felicity, close to outer life, in retreat. But one must freely and spontaneously participate in outer life with joy and the laughter of the soul. These are the four conditions for a spontaneous and a practical equality to function. Till then, till this ideal condition is achieved, it is a hard path. We know, mentally we know, but in practice we have to face situations. The reactions are there, we can't help. The mind knows, but still the mind yields. We have to recognize the situation, and as Sri Aurobindo says, take the sting out of these reactions which come from our desires and preferences. Here again, the establishment and the growth of calm by keeping the mind constantly above the play of desires. Mind can watch, mind can sanction, but from a position that is aloof, from a position not only as a witness but as an overseer. Mind has to rise above. There are reactions, there are elements that are posed by prana, the life force. It is not difficult, if the mind is sufficiently strong, to put its will upon the life force and suppress it or refuse to participate in its movement of desire. But if that movement of desire or preference comes in the mind itself, it is much more difficult. That can be done only by taking our position even above the active mind. The understanding and will, the buddhi, has to take a poise above the normal movements of mind. As we know, the mind itself has so many layers. But the understanding will, that must be kept aloof, uninvolved in mental movements. But if the buddhi itself is mixed, it is one thing to note that it is the sense mind, it is the desire mind that wants, and the buddhi, the understanding will can assert itself. But if somehow this preference, this slant, this choice has surreptitiously entered into our understanding and will, how are we going to face the situation? It can only be done, Sri Aurobindo points out, by surrender to the master of our being. There must be constantly an attitude of surrender to the supreme will. And as this attitude gains ground, as we, with the sincerity at our command, we practice and make real this attitude in life, each time the buddhi itself is exposed to this temptation, this inner surrender to the master of our being prevails. That corrects, takes stock of the situation. We allow the will of him or her to whom we are surrendered to correct our individual buddhi, our individual will. Even here, as those who practice yoga know, that the path is not a smooth path. There are enough backslidings, there are enough self-deceptions, there are too many temptations. And each step is gained, followed by half a step of backsliding. But it will not do to get disappointed, to get discouraged. We have to take it as a process. Utilize each setback as an occasion to measure the insincerity in us which opened the doors to the mishap, and know for certain that these setbacks, these backslidings, these failures come because room is given to them in our nature, in our being, known or unknown to us. As long as there are defects, as long as there are lacunae, these things are going to come. They are to be taken as reminders that there is still some leeway to be made up. With all these preparations, you can visualize a condition in which one is calm in all circumstances, and that calm is based upon a sense of unity with all. And this sense of unity with all is a result of what Sri Aurobindo calls a universal vision. A vision that sees not only what is relevant to our little selves, but to all, relates ourselves to everyone else. And it is only then that one can be sure of a fundamental equality that has started functioning. In the life of the seeker, it is inevitable that with all this calm, with all this sense and knowledge of equality, things evoke a particular reaction in a particular trend, maybe in the mind, in the emotions, in the life force, in the physical actions. Our nature tends to turn in a particular way. They are to be taken, these signs are to be taken at that stage as the direction in which the will of the Lord wants his Shakti, his power active in us to respond. Each one has his own way, has his own nature, has his own tendency and direction in which he meets the impacts of life and he reacts. This is called the Swabhava, based upon Swadharma, self-nature. And one has to observe which way one naturally tends to react. It is to be observed and for the time being allowed to prevail, because this is not a permanent state. An ideal state would be when we react, the Shakti in us, the power in us reacts according to the truth of each situation, not according to its own first trend. If one is sincere in taking this, that one acts and moves according to the higher will reflected in the individual will, it is a state when one can claim and function as a perfect instrument. As he directs, so I function. But that is also a stage. Even this claim to be an instrument, a channel, is a subtle ego claim. A state must arrive when the personal individuality of even being an instrument, the pride of the instrument, that also has to yield. And one becomes identified with the supreme will, with the puissance that is acting, and one becomes only an open channel, not an instrument. Then we can say that it is the master who works and not the instrument. Not I or you, but it is the supreme master. As such an ideal condition is built up, there is the inevitable question of our relations with others. On what basis are we to organize our lives? As the sense of equality is established, as a sense of calm becomes permanent, and there is the inner awakening to the presence of the Supreme Master of our being, whom we see extended everywhere, there comes naturally an understanding. We are more charitable to others. We are no more inclined to find fault with others. But we tend to find explanations why others behave badly. What could have influenced the other people to behave that way? So there is what Mother called charity, an understanding of our environment, which gradually develops into love. And when we are invaded by this current of divine love, which understands everything and helps everything, that is a spiritual status which contributes its own energies to the people around us. We contribute strength, we contribute endurance, we contribute delight, but all in the measure in which we identify ourselves at some level with the divine presence among those around us, and make no distinction between our individual life and the lives of others. All these states of consciousness, of being, of delight, they are necessarily imperfect as long as we are confined to the domain of mind. An effort has to go on to transcend the boundaries of our mind in ignorance and open ourselves to the larger and the wider heights of the being. The ultimate perfection can come only when we gain entry into the supramental levels of consciousness, or when the supramental energy enters into us, making it possible for us to participate in an entire plenitude of delight and being, oneness of being, which cannot be described adequately in the human language that is at our disposal.
The different modes of nature, when they're transformed into the supernature, how do they actually work?
Molds.
Modes.
Modes. You mean the three gunas? Naturally, we have, it was somewhere else, yes. The three modes of nature, how they function when one transcends the modes, that is the question. Now what we call modes, tamas, inertia, immobility, rajas, movement, dynamism, impetuosity, sattva, enlightenment, quietude, balance. Now these are actually imperfect transcriptions of three higher powers, three higher modes of the spiritual being. They are transcriptions in nature, lower nature. Once you rise above the lower nature, you see that these very modes, three lower modes, reveal themselves to you in their original terms. Tamas what is what is inertia and immobility, reveals itself as peace, shanti, which is not disturbed by anything. Rajas, that impure, self-regarding dynamism of life, reveals itself as the pure spiritual force of execution. That force may hold itself or it may throw itself. Still, it is an effectuating force. It is the Chit-Shakti and Sattva, the enlightenment, the peace, that reveals itself as plenitude of knowledge, radiance of light. All the three were those things before they got deformed by the plunge of the soul into this inconscience and ignorance. The lower moods convert themselves into higher qualities, the divine powers, the divine values.
I don't remember if you make a reference when I was reading it, but it was very interesting to me because
We have seen a practical demonstration of this capacity of a person who has realized perfect equality, what Sri Aurobindo describes in the last paras of this chapter. That is, you are aware, you have the knowledge why things are what they are, even when they are against you, even when you fail in a thing, even when you are faced with obstructions, there is no upsetting. One sees exactly, step by step, why this failure is coming, why these difficulties are there. One sees the purpose for which they are there, the reason for which the divine will has allowed those things to work. And that very knowledge gives you the capacity to stand it. And this I have seen only in mother's case. She knew very well in each case why things are happening. But she said, if I tell you, you people would not understand, you would be confused. But to know it, that knowledge itself gives you the power to correct the situation if necessary, or to bear it, because you know what is going to follow. Most of us who are in ignorance are blinded by the immediate situation. As the equality grows and the calm understanding establishes itself, this capacity to see behind events, as Sri Aurobindo calls, to see behind your enemy, that he is really an opponent in the game of life, who is contributing to your growth. This is all right for us when it concerns other people. But when it concerns ourselves, to have that spontaneous perception, that can come only when we have that established, enlightened, imperturbable equality and calm. Unless one has that understanding, it is idle to speak of divine love. Because love can only be a consequence of understanding. If we feel certain waves of divine love with others and all that, it only means that the knowledge is within. We may not be awake to that knowledge, but that love is not false. On the surface we are not yet developed to see the knowledge behind that love.